I think we'd all agree that the internet has shaped the 21st century. But I think there's fundamental technological errors, systemic flaws, deep mistakes. And I think that these mistakes are so fundamental that small fixes can't repair the problem. That's why we need a full redesign. So ask yourself a few questions. Why does everything online feel broken? Why are apps slower? Why does data seem less private? Why is everything tied to a small number of corporations? Today's internet was never designed for identity, security, trust, and certainly not human well-being. It looks more like the internet today looks more like an internet empire than it does like a true network. In this video series, I want to explain what went wrong and why. In this video series that I'm going to make, I want to explain how the internet became sort of the dangerous behemoth that it is today. And in this video today, I'm going to talk about two major factors, which are surveillance capitalism and centralization. When the internet was born, it was designed as a decentralized network of peers. Computers connected directly one to another, sharing data between each other. There was no central authority. No one could have predicted that 30 years later, almost all data on the internet would go through 5 companies. This centralization wasn't intentional. It developed through a series of different phenomena, network effects, winner-takes-all economics, and basic human incentives. Let's break down exactly how it happened. The early web was decentralized, but it was hard to use. In the 90s, every computer could theoretically talk to any other computer around the globe. People self-hosted websites on university servers, on home machines, and on local small ISPs. Identity didn't exist yet. There was no Google login or login with Facebook or Microsoft. You didn't have to depend on Amazon, Microsoft, Google to just browse the internet. But the web was difficult. Hosting was complicated and technical. You had to know programming to get a website up. Servers were insecure. Routing was unreliable. You might find a server one day and a week later it not be accessible. There were no simple tools for managing data, deployments, servers, security. There was a lot of freedom, but it was freedom with friction. As the internet grew, companies emerged with a very simple value proposition. They said, we'll do this hard work for you. As the web grew in size and became more complicated, companies emerged with a very simple value proposition. That was, I'll do the hard part for you. And this created massive network effects. Let's take search, for example. Early search engines were terrible. They were human-managed lists of websites on the internet. You would click on a topic and click down through a hierarchy of different topics until you found a website that might be of interest to you. Google came and was so much better than the competition that everyone began using Google. And then Google became the gateway to the internet. And as more people started using Google, network effects kicked in. More people equals more data equals even better results. And the process just reinforced itself. And until Google became the doorway that everyone went through to get access to the internet. We have the same thing with email. Gmail became an offering by Google. It had massive storage, free for everyone. It had the best spam filtering anywhere online. So everyone moved. Amazon, and a little while later, Microsoft and Google came along and started offering server hosting. Startups flocked to this and quit maintaining their own server infrastructure. It was now easier, cheaper, more reliable to just put all of your services in the cloud by these pair of companies than it was to maintain your own infrastructure. The cloud took over. Content delivery and security became Cloudflare. It was one-click DDoS protection for all your websites, one-click SSL, one-click content delivery networks. So now my data got to my end users much quicker because it was cached around the world. Still, everyone flocked to Cloudflare, and now the entire internet, or a vast majority of it, is running through their services. And let's take finally identity. So the problem with having a username and password was solved by Google and Facebook saying, hey, use your identity with us to log into other websites. This became log in with Google or log in with Facebook. And now suddenly your identity online is by one or two companies, is stored at these one or two companies anywhere online. But let's take a case now. Suppose you use Google and Facebook, like billions of people around the world, to log into any website. If Google is down for a second or a day, you can't log in to do your shopping, to pay your bills, to confirm your identity anywhere online. Each of these aspects started as a convenience, then it became the standard, and finally it became a monopoly. The internet itself is naturally prone to monopolies because of, for instance, network effects, which means the more users flock to the service, the better the service becomes. An example of a typical service like this would be a social media outlet. If none of your friends are on the social media platform, why should you use it? The more people on there, the more valuable the service is. Another aspect are what's called data flywheels, which means that more users equals more data equals better models, which in turn leads to better predictions and a better service or product. There's also what's known as economies of scale. So as a small startup, you have to pay a relatively high price, let's say, for your servers and your infrastructure. But as you get larger and larger, that infrastructure and the prices drop because you're paying more in total. So economies of scale kick in. There are what's called switching costs, which means it's going to cost, if you've already used, say, Gmail for 10 years, you have all your data in there, all your contacts in there, all your friends are also using Gmail. The cost for you to change to another service is extremely high. You'll have to extract all your data, learn a new program, learn how enter in all your contacts into the new service. And so the switching costs to any new alternative are very high for a lot of these online platforms. And finally, there are API and integration services, which means once you have a winner in a market, everyone builds around that winner. Everyone builds their new apps to use Google or Facebook login. Everyone uses their services to post notifications to Twitter's API because they're the winner in the information market. Essentially what this does is it produces one winner in each category. So for search, you have Google. For ads, you might get Google and Facebook. For something like social media, you'll have Facebook again. For hosting, this would be Amazon with Azure and maybe Google up there. But still, for almost every one of these areas in mobile operating systems, you can see you have Apple and Google again. For video, what do you have? YouTube, which is owned by Google. For maps, for email, this is Google again, owning the service. There's essentially no alternatives. It's a monopoly owned by one or a few companies. So finally, what we can see is that once a company achieves scale, they become officially and essentially the internet, the layer for this service of the internet. They are how we understand the internet for that domain. If it's email, it's Google. If it's video, it's Google. If it's social media, it's Facebook. And the cloud replaced that original notion of peer-to-peer computing, of one computer being able to talk to any other computer on the globe, once everything moved to the cloud. And that was the internet's true original proposition. One computer could talk to another anywhere on the planet. But that became virtually impossible through NATs, firewalls, mobile networks, ISP restrictions, browser sandboxing, the fact that there's no true identity layer in the internet. So apps and services just moved to the cloud because it was easier, it was more reliable, and the browsers themselves forced apps to move all their back-end infrastructure into the cloud anyway. So if half of your service is already living in the cloud, why not put your entire service in the cloud? The result is that every service became your computer talking to the cloud, which is then taught to someone else on another computer. Everything is going to the cloud instead of device to device. My computer, John, talking to Bob's computer somewhere else on the planet. This destroyed autonomy. You don't own your data. Your apps don't work offline. Your identity is remote. It's not with you. It's with some other service. And finally, your digital life is all dependent on third parties. So the cloud itself was convenience that developed from basic human incentives, but it was a convenience that really cost you your freedom. So now let's come to DNS. This might get slightly technical for a second, but essentially your browser cannot talk to directly to someone else on the globe. It first has to talk to DNS to find out where another computer is. And in order to do that, it must go through what's known as the domain name resolution system. DNS centralized the entire web. You see, one browser cannot connect directly to another browser, device, or person. It has to go through a central server in order to find out where that device or person is. In order to do that, it uses what's known as DNS, domain name service, I believe. And what it will do is it goes to centralized servers. These servers are owned by essentially the United States and a few other companies across the entire planet, and they control all of the locations of the devices from a domain name. So when you type in google.com, how that resolves to a particular server address so that you can go to Google and enter in a search and your browser can actually find it. And this means the people that control DNS can censor websites. They can say, okay, this website should not be able to be found online. No one can find it. They can take people's domains. So if you purchase a domain, you don't really own it in the sense that no one can take it away from you. The people who own the domain name system can come and seize your domain from you. It also means that a misconfiguration can take down half the internet. And finally, you can't have cryptographic security. You have to trust whoever owns the domain. And because DNS is sort of a single point of truth, it also becomes a single point of failure for the entire internet. So what happens is collapse events reveal who really runs the internet. Let's take an example of Cloudflare. A couple weeks ago, we had a Cloudflare hiccup, and Cloudflare was out or experienced shortages for a couple of hours. What happened? Netflix, Twitch, thousands of startup apps, companies all over the world, everything went down, and essentially the internet was down for the entire time of the Cloudflare hiccup. We've concentrated so much infrastructure in just a few companies that whenever we have some kind of internal problem at one of these companies, essentially the entire global internet goes down. And this is the opposite of what the internet was designed for. It was designed to resist whenever there were issues or particular problems in one server somewhere in the network. It promised seamless updates, a high degree of reliability, seamless collaboration. A typical example of this would be Google Docs. I can work on it and my colleagues can work on it simultaneously, and we immediately see the updates. And it really delivered in a lot of ways on its promises, but beneath all that, there were a lot of hidden costs. And some of those hidden costs were the following. All data lives in corporate-owned servers, with the example of Google Docs, Google servers. All communication travels through company-owned servers again. You have the identity for who you are, who the person is working on the Google document. That also flows to the centralized service. And finally, all the trust is again assigned to that central player, in this case, Google. And so in exchange for ease of use, all the users gave up their autonomy. And so the world got applications that were easy to use, that were concentrated in a few players. And in exchange for that, the corporations, the megacorps, got essentially the infrastructure for human life on the planet. So the big idea here is that centralization wasn't planned. Nobody sat down in 1995 and said, ooh, let's figure out a way that we can make the entire internet belong to these 5 companies. Instead, in the dynamic system, users solved hard problems trying to build better apps for their end users. And those end users, they chose convenience over complexity, which is a understandable choice. And the basic winner takes all economics of the system led to the fact that just a few companies and the biggest players ended up winning out. And also the browsers that were developed in the mid-90s led to further centralization through specific patterns in the browsers themselves. And cloud services became the default infrastructure of the internet, and regular developers, startups, small companies, mid-sized companies stopped hosting their own infrastructure for themselves. So centralization emerged from basic human incentives and convenience. It was not something that was a specific intention designed or even thought about in the 90s. But now we're here. Now the internet behaves like an empire controlled by a few monopolies that essentially run the digital life of the planet. And it's invisible, it's inefficient, it's powerful, it's extremely centralized, and also unquestioned. Where do you hear anyone saying all the things I've said? Yes, there have been, you can find books on it, and you can find a few people in technological circles talking about this, but it's one of the biggest issues, I think, of our time, and compared to other things, no one's talking about it. And here's the thing, unless we redesign the internet from the foundations, and taking all these things into account, we're not going to be able to solve the problem of data privacy, of identity, of hosting, of a centralized internet, decentralizing that, returning the ownership and power back to the end users. This is only going to be a process because that is going to continually get worse and worse. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the internet became so centralized. Again, the internet was developed originally in the 70s in case of nuclear fallout or a strike. How can different computers continually communicate with themselves and exchange information if particular nodes fall out of control or lose power in that network? And now we're at a place where if one node falls out, the entire network goes down. It's the complete opposite functionality of what the internet was originally designed to achieve. So the good thing is that we haven't married ourselves to these design decisions that we've made in terms of the technology. There's nothing that fundamentally says we have to use browsers, we have to use the internet the way we designed it over the past 20 years. We can create new technologies that take these aspects into account and lead back to sort of a decentralized internet that gives the users the control and the ownership of their information. Now that we know how these different economic incentives work in the internet, we can design systems that take those into account and really return the power to the users. So that's something I want to talk about a lot more in future videos, how we can solve this problem. But first, I just wanted to present the first aspect of this problem of technology we have now, and that's sort of the centralization of the internet.